Hello everyone, quick prelude to the prelude. I realized after I recorded that I forgot to say the most important thing, which is to thank the Write the Docs community. I mean the organizers of this conference, but also all of you individual participants. I can say honestly that you all are the reason that I have a career. So thanks so much. I'm proud to be here. It's all love. Okay, now let's start the real talk. Hello everyone, my name is Matt Dodson. Before I start my presentation, let me give a quick mandatory intro. I'm a freelancer. My occupation is in technical writing and miscellany. By miscellany, I mean anything kind of adjacent to writing docs or writing long-form technical content. So I mean helping you deploy a website or implement Docs code or automation, writing tools, any kind of consultation for communication problems. I like variety, and so if you like this talk, I promise you I'll come to your project with an open mind if you come to me with an open wallet, and we can do some great work together. All right, let's begin. Here's my talk. It's called Not Trees But Graphs, a ground-up approach to fixing a doc site. I know the title and these images may seem a little esoteric, but really this is all about practical advice for making a reader-centered place of information. Okay, so what's the plan? I'll tell you my thesis up front. The best way to make high-level improvements to a large body of information is to start on the low level. By low level, I mean low-level changes to the docs and direct observation of readers and their specific problems. I know this doesn't sound very controversial, but the truth is that the low-level approach goes against our natural instinct to impose order. If you're in this audience, you're probably a person who likes to make sense of things. When we approach a large mass of unfamiliar information, our sense-making instinct compels us to immediately leap to the highest, most abstract level of information and then work our way down. I'm going to argue here that we must avoid this instinct, and I'll provide some practical strategies to start from the ground and reach a place where you can make informed and effective high-level changes. All of these strategies are going to come from my own work or from classic texts on technical communication, but my argument and my metaphor come from some trends in 20th century planning, some reading I did, especially the work of Jane Jacobs. So with that being said, permit me to travel back in time for a moment to 1930. Behold, the radiant city. This is the Vie Radieuse, a plan for a new type of urban space proposed by the Swiss architect Le Corbusier. It's one of a cluster of proposals that he put forth in the 1930s to design a modern city for a modern world, with modern people working modern jobs, using modern forms of transportation. Say what you want about the aesthetic and the social appeal of this place, but I hope you'll agree with me that it certainly looks clean and organized. And that's because Corbu designed these spaces from the bird's eye view, and the top-level perspective lends itself to appearances of cleanliness and organization. Here you can see the Plan Voisin, a proposed redesign of Paris. Note the order and regularity with its grids and regular patterns of buildings and spaces. And while these specific proposals weren't enacted, Corbu's work here was enormously influential on the following decades of urban planning and development. Developers were excited to create a modern, more rational design. Besides this utopian spirit, high-rise towers mean a lot of rents per square footage, and the identical blocks lend themselves to economies of scale. So here are some children of the Plan Voisin. All of these were projects for low-cost housing, and they were built with genuine intent and earnest optimism. So this is the Bijlmermeer in Amsterdam. It exists just like that, with that cool honeycomb structure. I just couldn't find a public domain image. Here is Cabrini Green in Chicago, Pruitt Ego in St. Louis, and again, these were all built very optimistically with great hope for new low-cost housing. However, in only a few decades, all of these projects had turned into the most unlivable areas in their cities. That leads me to an awkward fact. People aren't birds. False. And all of these places became, indeed, buildings for the birds. Inhabitants were forced into these isolating towers, and the vast, empty space limited social interaction. Walking anywhere is impossible anyways, since each building was cut off, lacerated from its surrounding by wide lane roads. Of course, everyone who lived here had a life that was as meaningful as anyone else's, but the residents were forced to live in a place that actively worked against their natural environment, their natural surroundings. Okay. And in short order, all of these places suffered poverty, crime, and social isolation. This is a very strong and very sad lesson about how the top-down approach imposed a form that was inhospitable to its users. Without inhabitants, buildings are not architecture but sculptures. And the top-down approach helped creating nice sculptural architectural models, but it completely disregarded the perspective of its terrestrial inhabitants. Meanwhile, the most enduring cities across the world are the ones that embrace organic growth, gradual change, and a healthy dose of chaos. So, this is my question. If the top-down approach to urban planning ignored the needs of the people on the ground, isn't it possible that we, as designers of information, might impose a form that makes sense to us, but not to readers? And that's what this talk is all about. Designing sites from the view of the person. But instead of viewing architecture sites from the view of the walker, let's move to the much lower stake world of documentation and view information sites from the view of the reader. Okay, I've run down architects enough. I should mention I'm not an urban planner. I'm sorry if I gave anyone that impression. And really, making a livable place for thousands of millions or millions of people is far more complex than making a nice readable site. Besides that, sites really aren't organized in space as buildings are, but in collections of data. That leads to my weird title, not trees but graphs. I'm not talking about botany or statistics here, but ways of grouping information. Probably from this picture you can already guess which is a tree and which is a graph. But on the left, in orange, we have a tree. It starts from the root node, proceeds down in this parent-child pattern until it terminates on the low level. On the other hand, in blue, we have the graph. It has no distinct parent-child relationship, as nodes can link freely, and it permits cycles. Oh, by the way, according to mathematical theory, a tree is a special type of graph. Sorry, I didn't know that when I made my RFP. I'm sorry to urban planners and mathematicians. Here's my question. Is a site, a documentation site, a tree or a graph? Think about it for one moment. The answer is both. From the side of writers and servers, a site is a tree. You can run this command, tree, on your site, and it will print out a tree-like representation of all the files within. And it's convenient for us as writers to think about pages in terms of directory groupings and directory groupings of semantic information or some kind of purpose. Besides that, computers serve pages according to the directory hierarchy. Browsers render pages according to the tree structure of the DOM. However, for readers, sites are much more graph-like. It's very rare for readers to actually care about the overarching structure that we work so hard to create. And the only visitor who's ever going to start at the site root and proceed down the hierarchy page by page recursively is a web crawler. So this flat, non-hierarchical experience of the web, of reading on the web, is further heightened by search engines since, here's my homage to Mark Baker, Google is not a tower. Rather, it is more like a subway train. Readers search for a topic, click a link, and immediately they are transported across the Google subway line to downtown Dogtown. The surrounding information organization has no influence upon the reader's view. It's uncontroversial to state that to design rich reader experiences, we must consider the experience of the reader. Indeed, that's like tautological. But if readers experience the site as a graph, we must design thinking of the graph way of navigating, thinking from the page, not from the root. And this is a little bit tragic because the truth is the top-down approach has a constant, though false, allure, especially for people who are just beginning to work on a site. This is because from the documentation side, we can only look at the information try to shape and organize it. For us, it's natural to write in the tree-like structure, thinking in the bookish form of chapters and sections. Besides that, there's a psychological pressure. What has happened? All right, sorry about that. Besides that, there is a psychological pressure brought by the fact that the technical writer is usually not an expert. Speaking for myself, I can say it's quite common for me to know less than my readers about the topic that I'm writing about and have less skill. These two pressures, to sculpt unknown information and to write for people who know more than me, create an instinctual response. Run to the hills, upwards, start from the abstract. And I have two writer personas, maybe not angel and devil, kind of devil and devil, that exert this to the top pressure. On the one hand, sometimes I might think I'm the wizard of information, if you will, the Corbusier of web pages. I don't need to know the material inside. I'm just going to wave my hands around and make a useful shape. On the other hand, in my rare moments of humility and honesty, I might think I'm a total donkey who doesn't understand this gibberish, so just reorganizing or refactoring provides a safe way for me not to do something stupid. I say, embrace this duality. As technical communicators, we can shape information to transmit stronger signals. As beginners, we represent the bulk of our audience. For any given skill, unless it's a core human competency, I mean like drinking water, the vast majority of people are beginners. If we humbly approach as beginners and design information from the ground, we'll make the reading experience more accessible for all. So let me say once more, designing for the reader requires knowledge of the information and empathy for their situation. Only through working on pages can we understand the content of the info. Only by learning to see the world as readers see it can we shape this content to be more useful for them or to create content that fills gaps. These two processes, understanding information, building empathy, require starting on the ground floor. That leads me to part 2 of this talk. Strategies. For the rest of this talk, I'm going to just discuss how to gradually progress towards making high-level, informed changes and adding high-quality content. This process involves expanding the scope of your changes to wider collections of pages and creating content that requires increasingly deep levels of understanding. But before I start telescoping, let's start with the beginning. Onboarding. So you just signed your big technical writer contract. It's time to start onboarding. Right when you join, your organization might have onboarding to give you. Could be a few days, could be a few weeks of videos. This will depend. Either way, I'm going to ask you this. Will your readers onboard? Pretty much, by the very nature of the fact that someone is hiring you to work on docs, your org probably wants external members to learn through self-directed reading. So, if you can, I suggest diplomatically saying no thanks to onboarding right at the beginning. Instead, try what I call non-boarding. Let me also just quickly say I got this idea from quick shout out to K6. I got this idea from the week of load testing. I just want to shout them out. Non-boarding is just viewing Dogtown from the reader's eyes. Just spend a week or two just reading the docs, trying things out. Very likely you will already discover some gaps that you can fill. And after you finish your week or two of non-boarding, then you can really start onboarding and you can just I should have said gaps and then changed it right there. There you go. That's a little bit. I'm breaking the fourth wall. Well, you could probably already find things that are broken. After that, you can start to interview your internal members. This is where you can start doing your onboarding. This is also where you'll discover the major workflows that readers will use that use your docs for. So like high traffic areas affect high numbers of people. So this is a good place to start because all incremental changes will have the most marginal benefit. For example, this is the Shibuya intersection in Tokyo, over which 3,000 people cross at once. Everybody in this photo is going to some different place. They'll all sleep in a different place that night, but they all pass through Shibuya, and a large defect there could end up affecting who knows how many surrounding blocks. So find your Shibuya, map out the most important areas, and from here, the work radiates outwards. I mean radiating both from topic to topic, like to wider collections of topics, and radiating from within the page. If architecture is defined, as I have seen, the stuff that's hard to change, then we should start with working on the easier things first. For example, here's a building concept, but it was popularized by Stuart Brand. These are called shearing layers. Essentially, a shearing layer is a measure of how durable an item in a structure is. Some items, like the foundation, are essentially immovable. Other items, like the furniture, can change daily. So, when you start, you can find the most movable layers of your information. For example, these are the shearing layers of the MDN docs. At the most movable level, we have the sentence. Then we have like a paragraph, a section, a page, sidebar collection, the whole sidebar, and then the top level categories. If you're moving these top level categories around a lot, I think you've got a serious issue with planning. It's costly cognitively, it's confusing for readers, and I'm going to say again and again, it can't be effectively done. You can't make these high level changes if you don't know what's inside these pages. So let's start shaping up our content and learning our readers. So first we're going to start on the ground floor. Your first tasks should really require very little effort and have straightforward solutions. I compare this to fixing potholes. So if we fill this hole, we're not going to fix the infrastructure of New Orleans. But users of this street will have a better walking, driving, and cycling experience. So these are all bottom-up strategies. The first thing I recommend doing is actually just running a link checker, finding broken links. They don't even need to be in your map. You can just start looking anywhere, because a broken link is unambiguously bad, and so fixing it is going to be a small win. Here you can see these little nodes, these pages are stressed, their friend is stranded on 404 Island. Unbreak this link and let the information circulate again. And besides that, you can just start enforcing your style rules, and you can make the kind of fixes to the key pages, like I mean the sort of bread and butter work of a technical writer, like the obvious stuff, simplifying sentences, breaking paragraphs up, making headings more descriptive. This is just objectively good. It boosts the signal to noise ratio. And the good news is, if the key pages are already fixed in good shape and no link is broken, you can just move on to the next thing. Anyways, you want to leave the docs in that state for the next writer. And so this early toilsome work doesn't really require much brain power. I forgot to mention also, when you begin working, the first kind of creation you can do on these pages is improving the intro. So like when you get off the Google subway, you're in downtown Docktown, you don't know where you are, it's an unfamiliar place, you're looking around desperately trying to make this place make sense for your purpose. So if you have a good intro, that will really help readers orient, understand what's going on this page. Is it for me? Is it not for me? It will help readers and non-readers alike. Okay, sorry. Let me jump back. I forgot myself. This early toilsome work doesn't really require a lot of brain power, so you can use your excess cognitive capacity to start learning about your reader and about how to use the tools that you're documenting. To gain domain knowledge at the start, I recommend two things. First, just reading the first chapter of a book about your subject. Second, that's actually an extra, talk to people who talk to users. So I'm going to recommend 3. You can also just observe your readers. So read their forum posts, their Reddit threads, find YouTube videos and read the comments. It's too early to understand the technical side, but at least you can get familiar with their culture. I mean, really just seeing, what's funny, if they're looking at memes. You can start to learn a little bit about them, about their life. And besides gaining familiarity with them, you need to start using your tools to practice. The tools you document, I mean, not your authoring tools. I will say, this is maybe like a hot take, but writers should know how to use the tools they document. This is mandatory to write with authority and trust. So just start trying out some examples in the docs. If you find issues, please note them and ask questions. It's very important to ask questions about anything that confuses you. Remember, most readers are beginners, and as an internal member, you should receive more attention than the typical outsider. So this is no time to feel bad about asking stupid questions. Stupid questions unveil deep answers, and you are the reader's advocate. You're speaking for everyone. Besides that, we are donkey wizards. We have no time to feel ashamed about being ignorant. I said preferably in writing because that's documentation for yourself, which leads me to the mid-level. After you get familiar with the info, the problems, and the tool, now you can really start addressing readers' needs by improving the flow of pages and adding content. I call this like sort of linking pages together. This is naturally more abstract. For thinking in graphs, how nodes link, saying, look at how pages talk to each other. Here's a little cartoon. For readers, the site is a graph. So to develop flow, you must consider how these pages work together. These inter-page structural changes require a bit more abstraction, but one thing you can do right away is you can start separating your docs into types. It's very important to contain each page to a purpose. Once you separate things into types, you can make templates for that repetitive interface, so every single page for a writer and reader kind of has the same purpose, has the same form. And then you can add links, link richly, help people navigate. And on the creative side, I would say start standardizing your lexis. Oh, sorry, sometimes I say lexis, sometimes I'll say terminology. I just mean making sure that the same word always means the same thing. This is really going to help. Once you've started to read chapter 1, you should have a little bit of familiar with this lexis. And at this stage, you can be actively writing, like fixing examples, writing tutorials. It's easy to think of your audience as just your past self. Write to the person you were who was more ignorant a few weeks ago. And you can also start learning, oh yeah, add diagrams, that's a good idea. You can also start learning more about your readers and really addressing your readers' needs. So like you can start to read industry articles about what they're doing. And you can also, however people are doing something, they're probably frustrated. They'll express the frustration in writing somehow. So start to read issues. It's really important to know how readers struggle, which also leads very well into a good way to start practicing beyond beginner skills. So you can maybe test examples and try to reproduce the issues, see how far you can go. You could also start maybe building some toy implementations and learning how things fit together in the wider info ecosystem or technological ecosystem of their world. So like, for example, if you're working on a REST API, it's very, very unlikely that a real user, not a reader, but someone who's actually using the tool, is going to just want to make a curl request. Rather, they want to do something with the response, like take the value, do something with this value. So learn how to use your tools to do things. Make it your tool an input. Make it an output for something else. Start connecting it all together. Okay, now you've been moving up from the beginner level, you've got some kind of competency now. And as you develop skill, you're growing distant from your beginner self. So it's very important that you test your docs with readers. Of course, qualitative metrics are helpful proxies, but nothing beats seeing whether your docs can help a real individual. So start to look as if they serve well for answers in like a forum post or support questions. You could say like, hey, can you read this doc? Tell me if it fixes the issue, or if it helps. You can maybe even set up usability issues. You've got to figure this out on your own. It's going to depend a lot on like how this could be plausible. Will depend a lot on your situation. I worked on one tool, it was a popular tool, and sometimes I could find people doing live coding on YouTube, and they would be reading the docs as they're working, which is an amazing way to just watch how people naturally interact with the docs and build things. So the most important thing is like you don't get lost in your vision where you're Corbusier imposing that form. You must always be thinking about the reader and not just thinking abstractly or thinking distantly, but really looking. Observation and perhaps direct interaction. Because this is how you can get now to the top level without being the so-called expert with the curse. By now, you can actually do useful things and you have a pretty good handle on your core docs, the information they contain, and how they serve the readers. But the work doesn't stop. This is where you can start to think about developing docs of refined quality. I mean moving beyond the useful and into the beautiful. Look at Grand Central Station here. You see the ants on the ground? Of course, this terminal is obviously useful, people are walking on it. But it's also being used, and it has a certain beauty that heightens as it matures. Similarly, information environments should enrich with time, becoming more informative with better flow and deeper, farther-reaching conceptual information is all how you can bring this rich, mature nature, the deeper quality to your docs. So you can do some kind of deeper, high-level changes now. And you can also maybe start to add a kind of deeper writing. You have the skill and the knowledge now. This is where you can maybe write the longer articles, for example, like multi-part tutorials or multi-part procedures. These deep writing is what will stick in the reader's brain the longest time, especially more conceptual stuff. So it's like how to use the app in context, where it's more thinking about practices in the industry, or adding how things work in the hood, like it kind of deep dives in how the tool works. Can be very, very important for people who want to hack on your tool and do something cool with it, develop on it themselves. And you're also starting to acquire, so even if you have perfect docs, the work is never going to end, because like you can enhance your presentation, you can add docs as code, you can write meta documentation, because this is all about building things that endure, and someday you will leave too, even if it's, well, I don't want to get morbid, but we all leave a project at some point. And this is also where you can get deep knowledge. You should understand your tool's limitations, because at some point you'll say, like, this is not a good problem for this tool. And you need to think about why these limitations exist. Contrast is how we can really deepen our understanding. Besides that, you could maybe look at how things are really implemented in the real world. Maybe finish the book now. And it's time to develop expertise. Now you have not just intermediate skill, but you're something like an expert. This is where you can maybe participate in design discussions. So like, I notice when I write, if the tool has a complicated design, it also makes it complicated to document and of course to use, so just like to practice, to document. As you get really familiar, you can move from being the reader's advocate, making nice looking docs, to being the user's advocate, saying, no, this is the way we must design this. This is how the API should work. This makes the most sense from the user's perspective. It would be really useful. And I would say the final goal of expertise is that you could stand in for like a solutions person. So I would say the truth is that the greatest communication, technical communication, usually comes from people who know their tools the best. I mean, people like Brian Kernighan or Julia Evans or Donald Knuth with algorithms, or like Richard Feynman in physics. Usually the best, the deepest stuff, the stuff that really will stick at someone's head, maybe beyond even the life of your tool, but it will influence how they think about the world. This usually comes from people who are experts. So it's necessary. Okay, now this is all the strategies I'm going to propose. But before I finish, allow me to return to these little bubbles. Really, communication from document to reader is one way. Docs can transmit skill through tutorials and knowledge through the reference and explanation. And on the reader side, knowledge and skills support each other. Like you can apply things, or you can learn theory. The theory helps you apply. The application helps you learn the theory. But however, if you acquire your own skill and knowledge about the domain, you can bring that back to the docs and boost the signal for everyone. Besides that, this entire process is iterative. I'm giving this talk in the flow of time, but I don't want to give you the impression that this is a linear process. It's true, low-level work happens more often early, but new info always comes in, things break, people change, software changes, and with each iteration, the links become more interconnected. This is that maturation process. Okay, so you started from the bottom. Now we're here. I'm not sure if you noticed, but I've been building the whole time this little step pyramid as I progressed. Each low-level task provides a foundation to make effective higher-level changes. Note that I place learning the tools and the problem space to be necessary to create sufficient bases. Information that's more organized is easier to reshape and structure, but a writer also needs to understand the reader to know where to best place content and how to best add content. So the process of gradually learning and shaping information creates progressive layers of foundation to build upon. The bad news is this requires work. The good news is that this progression works naturally, from easy to hard, from toilsome to interesting. And the final thing that I'll note is that these documentation tasks become more ambiguous. Like, it's much more ambiguous to write a thorough conceptual article or do some deep restructure than it is to fix a broken link or like remove a comma space. But as the tasks become more ambiguous, you're developing expertise, and this expertise can help you navigate the ambiguity better. And so now you're really in a position to become, well, wait, hold on. What's that? Zoom in again? Zoom in? Zoom in? To become the document wizard. Look at how she is smiling on top of Doctown, fully aware that she knows the people and the pages below, and she can improve them in the best way possible. Thank you. That was my presentation. I look forward to your questions. I hope it was fun and useful.
Okay, well, welcome, Matt. It looks like everybody is very excited about your talk. It was very interesting. We loved hearing about architecture and how we can use that to make our docs better. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So let's look at some of the questions that people had. Do you have any tips or techniques for testing the information architecture of a doc site or a knowledge base?
It's going to be really dependent. I think a lot depends on how much leeway and freedom the writer has. But if you can, and if you actually have a user base, I would always recommend asking people who are reading if maybe you can just watch them observe. So doing some kind of usability testing. Maybe you could come up with something like, say, could you tell me how to, whatever, run a callback after this function, and just see if somebody can use the docs to get there, and maybe look at how they get there, because you'll start to see how one reader's mind is thinking. I mean, everybody approaches information differently, but I do also believe that from the particular, something universal can come out. So I really believe that it's often better, this is my own bias, but I believe it's often better to hear a few people, watch a few real people, than look at a lot of metrics. I think it's the best thing is to look at the individual.
I think that is a really excellent point. Can you just talk some more about usability testing? Have you been doing that in your company?
I have, well, I'm a freelancer, but in some old places I have done that. And sometimes I've done testing, sometimes with the people who are really beginning. You can ask them if you can join and watch them try to install. And it could be really amazing, because sometimes the most beginner, the most novice, they will ask questions, or they will run into something that maybe you never thought of. And it will actually reveal really deep problems in the process. But the main thing is, I think you have to go out and talk to people. So you have to have an organization that's comfortable letting you do that. And then you have to find users who will be comfortable participating. I mean, normally people like to participate, especially if it's something they already like, but you never know. Other times I've asked to do testing and I never got a response. So what can I do there?
Yeah, it just really depends, doesn't it, on what people want to do. Yeah, like some people are just not comfortable in that kind of setting, you know?
Sure.
Absolutely. Let's see. You just said in your talk, link richly. So how much linking do you think is too much linking?
Oh, that's a magic question. I don't think there's any answer. It depends on, I think that really depends on our judgment. And then as writers or authors, we start to get a sense of our judgment of what is appropriate or not. Because I don't know, have you ever been on Wikipedia and it'll say something like, this event happened on January 14th. And then you click and you notice there's a hyperlink on January. You go, oh, did something interesting happen this January? And then you click the link and now you're just reading the Wikipedia page about the month January, which is maybe interesting, but has nothing to do with what you're talking about. So I think we know the extremes. You just have to find the balance in between. So always I try to think in what is the ratio of signal and noise, but there's no science. And the other thing that I would do is I try to be very mindful of how I browse sometimes. So if I'm actually like looking at something or trying to do something, I'll try to think about if I'm clicking or going back. I actually have a pretty low attention span, so it's very likely for me to click and forget to come back. And that also might change on my own mental state. If I'm more tired, maybe I'll click something and never return.
Oh, right.
So I mean, I think there's no science. You have to apply a little bit of art to that.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, here's a question that this one was really popular in chat. So let me see if you can help us. If your docs are a part of a larger site, how do you convince your organization to embrace a different approach? So basically, how do you re-architect if there's already maybe a bad architecture in place?
Well, I think a lot of it is about having support and people who will trust you, because that's kind of, in fact, that was in my talk at the beginning, but it was too long. I had already been very verbose. But
okay.
I think if you have an organization that lets you work with autonomy, that lets you work with trust, where everybody thinks about, because this is, in some ways you have to be thinking about these processes, because unlike a top-down imposing the structure first, you have to be sort of making things up as you go, and you have to embrace a little bit of improvisation. And so I think it all starts from the organization that would let you do this. I don't know how much is worth it for a person in an individual organization. I don't think you should necessarily be, in a great fight for a certain documentation method. Because if you have, if you really want to be raging against the system, maybe you should work in like a political cause or environmental cause. But so I would say that it's about showing a system and trying to do work quickly. And I think in my experience, if you start doing things that have some kind of result and that are showing that something is working better, people start to respect that and you can gain trust. So, but if you have to work really hard against where the top level people, they want a certain metric, a certain result, it could actually be very hard to navigate in that. And in that, I'd say there's nothing wrong with just showing up and doing your job either. I mean,
okay. You don't have any real tips for how to deal with like that kind of not very open organization?
Only try to be the change that you want to see, even in a very small level, and don't get involved in big conflicts, because you're going to end up with a lot of emotional exhaustion, and probably any kind of conflict is not going to win you any friends anyways. So I think it's about trying to slowly and incrementally work on a more collaborative approach. But it's very hard, because this is a problem, I think, not only about docs, this is about working in an organization that's not working how you want to. And that's a big problem.
Yeah, it can be really tough in that kind of thing. But I in that kind of organization, but it sounds like what you're saying, it would help at least some, be the change that you want to see, do what you can in your small space. That's really great advice. Here's another question. How do you go about information typing legacy content? So what sort of framework do you recommend for that kind of problem?
By the way, all of these questions are really too smart for me. So if anybody else has any answers, I will appreciate them as comments or whatever. I think this, again, it depends on how useful the legacy content is. If it's still really actively being maintained in some way, or if it's part of something that is still highly trafficked, it might be worth, I just believe in the diataxis model. Like, I think that's a good model of the sort of just focusing on 4 types or 3 types with DITA. I actually don't even think, I think the idea is that you have a purpose for every page. So with legacy, this is another thing, is where if you're just really focusing on breaking things down, it can be very easy work to sort of refactor or to look at a page and just make the sentence better. But you could do it forever if the documentation is huge, and it really might not be very worthwhile. So I think it's again about setting priorities and then deciding how much should we try to make what is legacy conform to our current standards, because it might not be necessary or it might be very necessary.
Okay, I think we're on our last question. Let me go see what. I'm just going to ask you a quick, I'm just going to call out that you were talking about a purpose on every page. I really liked that. I think that's basically what we have time for right now. Is there anything else you want to say before we sign off?
No, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to all the presenters. Thank you to Write the Docs. Thank you to participants. It's been really fun. I'm really proud to be here. It was great.
No, thank you. We really enjoyed having you. You were just very inspiring. Honestly, we loved those photos of the sort of brutalist architecture where everything is so regimented. And Oh, you got something to say about that?
I do, because at the very end of my talk, the more I did research on these urban, the more I realized, wow, these are such huge issues and they're so complex socially. I actually had wished I had chosen maybe something a little less complex, because by the end I thought, there's everything, we're talking about decades and decades of experience and research. And so by the end I thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't even talk about urban planning. So I'm happy that it went,
oh no,
it was well received.
No, I think people really enjoyed it. It was a really cool metaphor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're getting lots of love in the chat. You should go back and just look at it, because people really enjoyed your talk.
I love that. I send my love to you all.
Yeah, anyway, thank you very much, Matt. That was so well done. And I look forward to talking to you more at another time.